Good day, everyone. So today we will discuss Module 9, Gestalt Psychology. But before that, I introduce myself. I am Shalami A. Pipito. So here are the learning objectives of this topic. So at the end of this discussion, the student will be able to describe the different Gestalt principles, last ways of applying Gestalt psychologies in the teaching learning process, and last is to demonstrate the appreciation of the usefulness of Gestalt principle in teaching learning process. Gestalt psychology serves as the foundation of the cognitive perspective learning. It opposes the external and mechanistic focus of behaviorism. It considered the mental processes of perception. So, when we say the cognitive perspective, it is more widely held than the behavioral perspective. So, it includes mental construct such as the traits, beliefs, memories, motivation, emotions. So here is my assigned topic is Gestalt principles. In Gestalt principles, there are 6 principles. First is law of proximity. Second is law of similarity. Third is law of closure. Fourth is law of good continuation. And fifth is law of good fragrance. And last is law of good figure or ground. So Gestalt theory was initial cognitive response to behaviorism. It emphasized the importance of sensory, whole, and dynamic nature of visual perception. So, ibig sabihin nito ay ang Gestalt theory ay pag-uugali na hindi maaaring maunawaan ang mga tuntunin ng mga maliliit na bahagi nito. Dahil ang buo ay mas malaki or mas lamang kaysa sa kabuuhan ng mga bahagi nito. So, ibig sabihin, mas maintindihan ng bata o ni learner kapag nakikita niya muna na buo ang isang bagay o as a whole bago niya matiyak ang mga parte nito ay kabilang sa kabuuhan ng bagay. Kaya sinasabi na kabuuhan o as a whole. The term Gestalt means form or configuration. Psychologists Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Kafka studied perception and concluded that perceiver or the learner are not passive but rather active. So they suggested that learners do not just collect information as is, but they actively process and restructured data in order to understand it. So simply we say that the learners, they are not passive but rather active. Now we move on in Gestalt principles. First is law of proximity. Elements that close together will be perceived as coherent object. When objects we are perceiving are near each other, we perceive them as belonging together, which means they perceive or it will perceive that they belong together. So as you can see now in presentation, there is a example of law of proximity, which is the dots or the puzzle box. So in that example, on the left side, it appears that there is one group because they are close together, and the way we see it, it's only one group, while on the right side we can perceive it that there are 3 different groups. So the next is law of similarity. Link similar elements together. From the word itself, similarity, we can see the similarities. So here we have example, the logo of NBC. So in the image, there are the feeder that has different colors that we can perceive it that they are similar because of the shapes. Elements that look like similar will be perceived as a part of the same form. That's the law of similarity. Third is law of closure. We tend to fill the gaps or close the figure perceived. Object grouped together as seen as a whole. We tend to ignore gaps and complete contour lines. In the image or in the example, there are no triangles or circles, but in our minds, fill in the missing information to create familiar shapes and images. Fourth principles is law of good continuation. So from the word itself, continuation, it involves the continuous line. So here in the example, we have Amazon logo. In the pictures, we had an arrow line which is pointing starting from A to Z, which it defect that the Amazon has everything in their store from A to Z. So number 5 is law of good fragrance. Refers to a symmetry, simplicity, and regularity of pattern. Here we have example of Olympics logo, which is you can already perceive once we see it. So here we see it that there are 5 circles. So we can already perceive that there are 5 circles. So that's what law of good fragrance. So it means there are simplicity of the pattern or the figure, and then there is also symmetrical or the regularity. So that's the law of fragrance. Now let's proceed to the last principles, which is law of figure or ground. In these principles, we perceive a certain object to foreground and background. The most of us, the way we see the picture in the example, we first pay attention so its foreground than to its background. So here we have an example of the face and vases illustration. So as you can see the image, there are the faces and vases, which depend in our ways of our perception. If we see a white as a figure, then it is perceived that it is a man and vice versa. So that's all the 6 Gestalt principles. The continuation of this discussion is presented with Mr. John Ray Ignares. Thank you for listening.